But today, we are excited because we get to grill Bill. And you have sent in pages upon pages of questions. Many of them are amazing. I want you to know, if any of you like Twitter, you can tweet at me a question. We're gonna do some live kind of in-service questions that I will take. You can just at Steve Ryan Carter. But Bill, I'm gonna jump right in. I want verbal precision. I want honesty. I want candor. I want a hug by the time this is done. But here's number one. You started Willow when you were 22, and you would talk about family matters in the mid-70s. Now it's 2018, and we're once again talking about family matters. What have you seen change about families in our church over these past 4 decades?
Probably the greatest change I've seen is the pace of life. When I think back to 1975 versus 2018, it seems like we're over-revved in family lives these days. Most of the time, both parents are working. That wasn't true 40-some years ago. Social media, kids' athletics, the different after-school curriculum opportunities. I mean, all of it just makes us operate sort of at a warp speed now, and I don't recall it being quite that frenetic back in the 70s. I think another thing is that the divorce rate was only 20% when we started the church. And people were getting married in their late teenage years and early 20s. Wasn't uncommon at all for me to officiate at the weddings of, two 20-year-olds or a 19 and a 20-year-old. That's changed. And I think, most of the time it's like mid to late 20s now that I would do a wedding. So I think a lot of changes.
Well, we have so many great questions that came in. This is going to be really fun. We had someone who acknowledged that you've done hundreds and hundreds of weddings, but they want to know what your success rate is. How many of those couples are still together?
Well, I successful got them married, so let's just start there.
Counts for something.
I signed their certificate anyway. I've never kept track, to be honest, but this much I know. Every time I've done a wedding, I stand down front next to the bridegroom, and then the doors of the venue open and back, and then a beautiful young woman walks down with her dad usually. And in that moment, when a wedding is going on, every single person in that venue is sure that union is going to last forever. Why would you get married if you weren't planning on this thing being a lifelong commitment? And yet we know that today the divorce rate is about 50%. And so what happens is people who really thought and hoped and prayed that their union was going to make it to the grave, at some point something happened. And the marriage hit rough patches. And sometimes rough patches draw you back together. You get Christian counseling, and those rough patches can actually make your marriage stronger. But then there are some relationships that don't make it over the long haul, and then they head into divorce, as we all know. One thing we've tried to do as a church all these years, we've tried to make ourselves and our resources available to keep marriages strong, and we offer all kinds of learning opportunities and ways that you can do that. And when the unthinkable happens, when a marriage dissolves, when the differences can't be bridged, when trust is broken or whatever it is, if a marriage can't survive, then we try to work with people who are going through the heartbreak of divorce, and we try to have them process what they can learn through it and actually get to the end of a process and then move on with their life, because God still has a story for divorced people. God still has grace that's sufficient for the future in the lives of divorced people. So we want to be people who fight for marriages, but who also provide ministry and love and rebuilding and restoration for those who go through a divorce. I think it's Malachi 2:16, where God says, I hate divorce. Well, some people think that that text means that God hates divorced people. Nothing could be further from the truth. It breaks God's heart to see people who were in love and were trying to make a marriage work, and then for whatever set of reasons it doesn't work anymore. He hates the heartbreak associated with divorce. He hates the broken promises. He hates some of the fallout that happens in the lives of kids and grandkids over it. But we're trying to be a healing community for those who wind up divorced, and we want to fight for marriages to stay together as much as we can.
That's a great answer. We have a number of single people in our church, and there was a number of questions that came in. And there are some singles in their 20s, some single because of divorce, some singles because of a loss of a loved one. What advice would you give? Because there are some single people who go, man, 50% of people getting divorced, I don't want to be in a marriage, and others do. What advice would you give to both sets?
Yeah, statistically, psychologists, sociologists would say that it's in the high 90% that all singles would like to get married. It would be very unusual for someone to say, not interested in the whole subject matter. They might get discouraged along the way and decide, that their parents had a broken marriage and they can't find the right person. But most single people would rather be with a partner, okay? So what I have tried to do over the years is ask each single person to search their soul and to actually come to terms with, how much of a priority am I going to make finding the love of my life? Now, a good friend of mine and yours is Henry Cloud, and Dr. Cloud says routinely to single people, if you would like to find a lifelong mate, you better start dating, and he says you got to get your numbers up. You got to date a lot, because if you date a lot, then you're going to learn the kind of person you don't want to be with. You're going to learn about yourself, and you might come across a person who you do want to be with. But he says, keep your numbers up if you're real serious about it. Then there are other single people who, when they look deep in their soul, they say, you know what, that's just not that much a priority for me anymore. And they lean into the church, they get into a small group, they get on a serving team, they get all involved with stuff at work, and they can live fantastic, completely satisfied, fulfilled lives as singles. And many of my single friends say, don't feel sorry for us. I mean, man, we've never done diapers. We don't have to do half the stuff that you do. And so I don't feel sorry for some, unless they really had it in their heart to want to find someone and they can't. So here's a little extra credit for the 11:15 hour. 1 Corinthians 7, the Apostle Paul says something pretty stretching. He says, why don't some of you single people consider making the choice not to get married so that you can give more hours of your one and only life to moving ahead the purposes of God in this world. You won't be distracted by the necessities of marriage and family and child raising and all that. You could just be full on, unfettered in your building of the kingdom of God. And Paul threw that challenge out. Now, I've been waiting for Steve to preach on that verse, and he just won't preach on it. But someday he will, and we'll see how the singles respond to that one.
We got a question from another single in our church who said, doesn't everyone live together before marriage these days? It seems that's just normal. Is that okay?
Is that okay with me? Is that okay? Let's turn to the scriptures again. God's word is very clear that sexual relations should happen inside a marriage between a man and a woman, and only in that context. So that means all the rest of people who do not fit in that category should be celibate, should be pure, sexually pure, okay? So if two people are heading toward marriage and they move in together, there's probably going to be sexual relationships involved in that, and so that would be forbidden by Scripture. But what I like to do when I read prohibitions in Scripture, I like to see if there's corroborating wisdom that would make sense on an earthly level. And so I've done quite a bit of reading on this, and here's what some sociologists would say. the stats first. If you move in and if you have a live-in relationship before you get married, there's between a 28 and 33% greater likelihood that you'll get divorced than people who wait to live with each other until after they get married. Those are just the stats. Fight with those if you want. Don't fight with me on it. They're honest. Okay? Now, so then you say, what might the reason behind that increased likelihood of divorce be for those who move in with each other before they're married? And one of the leading thoughts on this is if you decide to move in with each other and then the relationship hits a speed bump, if you weren't living with each other, it's quite common for dating couples to say, hey, let's take a 2-week break. You know, let's just have a cooling off period. Let's take a month off and think about this. Well, if you've already moved in together, who's going to move where? I mean, you've already got your funds commingled, your furniture in the room and all that. So what you tend to do is you say, well, we can't really break up for a little while to get our heads together to rebuild this relationship. So you keep dealing, or you don't actually solve the problem, the speed bump, you just stay living together. Here's another thought that's a little problematic. Usually in a move-in situation, before there's the decision to get married, there's one person who really wishes that the marriage would happen soon, and then there's the other person saying, I'm not ready yet. Now, every single day you get up in the morning with someone who you've been to bed with the night before and you're not married yet, and you're wondering, is he ready yet? Is she ready yet? When are they going to be ready? That puts tremendous pressure on that relationship. Tremendous pressure. And sooner or later, someone's going to say, hey, you know, if this isn't going to wind up in a marriage, now I think I might move out. And then quite often they go, oh, don't move out. Okay, I'll just get married. And that sets up a bad dynamic on wedding day too, you see? So it's more complicated than you think. So I still think God's wisdom on this is the best wisdom. Stay pure, live apart, and then build that relationship until you're ready to make that commitment, then get engaged, then get married, then set up house.
We had many questions come in around the LGBTQ conversation. Someone even sent in that when a child comes out, most often parents go into the closet. So a child comes out of the closet, most often parents go into it. What support do you feel that we as the church should offer for parents whose children come out as LGBT or Q?
Yeah, I think the entire Willow congregation would be shocked at how many conversations I have over the course of a ministry year with parents who set up time with me or catch me after a service or somewhere in the community. When they're walking toward me, I know something big just happened. I don't know if it's their marriage or what happened or so. And then they say, my 17-year-old daughter, 18-year-old son just came out and said they were gay. And the parents are in just a state of shock, okay? Now, as a pastor, you know, it's my job, it's my calling to minister to parents who have had this shock. And so what I try to do is say to them, and sometimes I just say it just to get them out of shock a little bit, is I say, hey, I'm glad to hear that because I thought you were going to say someone died. And no one died here, right? And they're thinking like that this is of death proportions. And I'm going, oh, I'm just so glad there was not a car accident, that you weren't going to tell me that your son or daughter died. This is serious. And we can work with this, but I'm so glad this person is still alive. And then the next thing I always say is, and promise me, you are going to stay in relationship with them, right? You're not going to kick them out. You're not going to be severe with them. Promise me you're going to stay in relationship with these kids, right? They go, well, I thought maybe I had to kick them out. And then I go through my little riff, and you've heard me do this before. I will say this to my dying breath. I've never known a single gay person who made the choice to be gay. they discover that they're gay at some point in their life. And the way it usually goes is they discover that they're gay, and then they get terrified that they might be gay, so they pray or go to counseling or do all kinds of sometimes strange things to try to be straight instead of gay, because they know the complications that are going to happen if they ever admit publicly or to their parents and friends that they're gay. So they don't choose to be gay, they discover they're gay. Then they try to get straight and they find out that they can't. And then they sink into a level of discouragement and shame. And that's where the suicide stats are absolutely frightening. Just this weekend, a woman stopped me and she said, oh my, and I could tell she had had a rough life, and she said her child came out as gay. And she tried to be supportive, but she watched, it was a daughter, and watched her daughter try to be straight, found out that she couldn't, start sinking into what she thought was just a depression, and her daughter took her life. And so I keep saying this to these guys who are going to take Willow into its future. I keep saying this to our staff and now to you. We're clear on the interpretation of Scripture that we hold, that marriage should be between a man and a woman. That hasn't changed in 40 years. We don't see that changing. However, this church has to get better at helping families who have kids discovering that they're gay. And I'm proud of these guys because last year they put together a parent group that met for 8 weeks where parents could find support and help and hope with each other when they learned that their kids were coming out gay. We want to build on that and fight for families who are finding out that they have gay children. So we can hold our conviction of biblical interpretation the way I just described, and we can be ridiculously loving and serving toward families who are facing this challenge. Do you agree with this? This is the way forward. So maybe one more thing. I haven't talked about this much publicly, but Time Magazine reported it a year and a half ago. I've been meeting backstage every 5 or 6 weeks with a group of 14 or 15 gay people from Willow. They are as saved as I am, as filled with the Holy Spirit as I am. They love this church. They want to further the purposes of God in this church, and we're trying to figure out how we can do that without, offending or without causing division in some ways. I love this group. I had them all have a dinner with the elders a while back so the elders could help us with this. So I do think there's a way in staying consistent with the scriptural interpretation that we hold and ministering to people, gay Christians who are a part of our church. I think there's a way, but we'll just pray that God will help us find it.
Bill, there are several hot topics around family issues.
More hot topics?
Well, along those lines. But
so this used to be Ask Bill, then it was Grill Bill, now it's feeling like Kill Bill. So I'm like, give me a layup.
Well, when it comes to these controversial topics like same-sex marriage or abortion, we have several people who have written in and who have said, some of them, you talk about these topics too much. Why is the church so focused on these topics? We had others who wrote in and said, you don't talk about these nearly enough. Why don't you talk about this topic that matters to me? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, not well. You should read my email because we have a fired up congregation. One of the things I love about Willow is there are so many people who feel so passionate about the wide array of social issues and justice challenges going on in our society. So I'll get emails from people who will say, it's been 9 weeks since you've mentioned anything about sex trafficking. Or I'll get, an email from someone, it's been too long since you've talked about the global poor. And it's, I just get hit from all sides. Last week, I did a message on Dr. Martin Luther King because it was a federal holiday and because we decided years ago we were going to lift up the value of radical racial inclusivity and so equality on Martin Luther King weekend every year. Well, this week I got some emails from people who said, all you ever do is talk about race. That's all you ever talk about. And I was like, boy, I'm not sure that's true. I just talked about Christmas at Christmas. Just talked about prisoners when we packed all those prisoner presents, and I talked about some other stuff. But we have a fired up congregation, and most of you who are fired up about a particular cause want us to talk about that cause more than we talk about anything else. And we're trying to hold up about 10 or 15 values. And I will say this, Steve and I do the planning for the topics. We probably don't always get it right. We probably don't always have the exact right rhythm, and it's mostly his fault. But he'll do better in the future.
Let me piggyback off that question. Reading a lot recently about kind of the uniqueness of the lifespan kind of increasing. We're actually now teaching to 4 generations, whereas in previous years it's been 3. And to think about kind of the uniqueness of our congregation, singles, married, families, grandparents, empty nest. I mean, the whole gamut. So there's one side from the kind of topic side, but there's another side from, well, there's a marriage message, or when's there a message for singles? How do you navigate with the uniqueness and how wide our congregation is? How do you speak to that?
So in the past, and you've been a part of some of these, we do it like a 2-day sermon planning retreat, believe it or not. And we try to schedule out about a year, sometimes a year and a half, and we say, what are the biblical passages that we need to bring to the attention of the congregation? What are the causes that we need to speak to? What are the generations? What are the stages of life that we need to speak to, so that we have a balanced menu at our weekend services? So that's our attempt. This is one of the broadest congregations, the widest bandwidth congregations I know of in the world. And can I just say the obvious, but we don't talk about it very much. So we have the very, very rich, and we have the very not so rich in our congregation who sit side by side with each other. And sometimes I see this while I'm preaching. I'll see the CEO of a multinational corporation whose name is in the paper quite a bit, and I'll just see the face of that leader, and then I'll look down the row and I'll go, oh man, there's a high school kid, and that's a single mom that I know. I love that about this church. I love that we have Democrats and Republicans. I love that we have the rich and the poor and all the races. I love our bandwidth. Just makes preaching to you pretty tough.
Let's switch the topic to grandparenting. So we all know how crazy you are about Henry and Mac. Someone wrote in that they heard you say at one point in time that you were actually not very excited about becoming a grandparent. What changed?
Well, there were some weird old men that made me not excited about grandparenting, because they'd run down to the bullpen with their, iPhones, and they'd say, I had my first grandchild, and look at him, isn't he handsome? And they'd show me the picture, and it'd be the chubby little ugly kid, I'm like, what are you talking about? And then, so this had happened. Look at now he's got his teeth. Look at it. I said, that didn't help, and so now he's walking now. And so it was, over enthusiastic guys my age so I just decided I'm not going to be a shameless idiot like that. And then Henry was born, and I joined the Shameless Idiot Club just immediately. And I'm as bad as anybody now. So I didn't think that the lives of my 2 grandsons, Henry and Mac, I I didn't think that they could occupy as deep a place in my heart as my own two kids did. You know, Todd and Shauna and I have been deeply, deeply connected. It would probably shock many of you to know that, you know, they're grown now, and we still text, email, or call each other every single day. We are really tightly connected as a family. And so I thought, given the tightness of our connection, you know, there's no little kid is going to, you know, enter that ring of connectedness. And then when those two kids were born, and you start seeing how much Sean and Aaron love those little boys, and then you say, well, I want to love who they love. And then, you know, the first couple of years, they're pretty worthless. They can't talk to you. They, you know, it's hard for grandparents because, you know, there's not a lot of communication. But when they can start talking, and then you can start doing activities with them. And so I had both boys over for breakfast yesterday morning. Lynn is visiting a sick relative. Aaron and Shauna were both sick, so I got both boys, and we cooked French toast for breakfast for about 3.5 hours. We absolutely destroyed the kitchen. And but at the end, when I brought them home, you know, they're like, thanks, Papa. It was fun to make breakfast with you. And you just go, oh.
We had someone who wrote in and said, what does a grandparent do if they don't agree with the way their kids are parenting? How do they handle that?
You keep your mouth shut. Unless it's something, that's all the young folks clapping right here. There can be a lot of hurt feelings because, you know, when grandparents are always trying to, are bringing correction or in ways that are different from the way that the actual parents are raising the kids, that's a real, that's incendiary territory right there. So every once in a while, we'll have a conversation and just say, we're wondering why this or why that. And we're happy with it, whatever the answer is, but they're their kids. And we try to give them quite a bit of independence, and we think they're doing a great job. So.
Going off the idea of parenting a little bit, and you kind of spoke to Todd and Shauna just for a moment. I love this question that came in. I'm the parent of 4 beautiful, incredible kids, all of whom are wired so uniquely. What advice would you give in how to best parent/discipline kids in a way that is consistent and fair, but also appropriate to the personalities of each child?
That's a really smart parent. Whoever wrote that question in, that's a smart parent. If the old school of parenting used to be, if you have 3 or 4 kids, you treat them all alike. You train them up all the same way. You give them all the same discipline. You give them all the same privileges and all that. Terrible idea. These kids are so different one from the other. So if you have 4 kids and you treated them all the same, 1 or 2 of them might benefit from that consistent treatment. You might destroy the lives of the other 2 kids who needed a different approach because of the way they were wired up, the way they were gifted, the way their temperament operated. So I've been pleading with parents, every kid is a one-off. One-on-one time with each individual child is absolutely essential. And Shauna just wanted to talk all the time. She didn't have an unexpressed thought and could fill the space, you know, with conversation all the time. Todd was very careful about opening up. And so I had to do projects with him. I had to take him places. I had to slow my life down until he knew I was in phase with him. And then after an hour or hour and a half of being together, doing something together, then he'd say, hey, Dad, can I talk to you about something? And I'm like, 90 minutes, you better have something to say, you know. But every kid is different. And you all, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you probably one last time that when Shauna was 3, she got on her big wheels and she went past the border where we told her she could never pass the border on the sidewalk. And I was at work. Lynn saw her do it, and so hauled her back in and said, Shauna, if you cross that boundary one more time, I'm going to spank your little rear. And Shauna put her rear out and said, spank me now, I'm going cruising. So, that was Shauna right there. And Todd, when we kind of drew the boundaries for him, Todd would say, I get it. It's great. We're like, really? But he was a thoughtful kid, and he goes, I understand boundaries. I understand why you'd want, to have certain borders here. Sure, no problem. Now, later on, Todd got adventurous and scared us. He sailed a sailboat all the way around the world, and, he became quite adventurous, but Shauna was just rebellious. And so we had to treat them quite differently. So, find their motivated abilities early. Some kids are athletes, some are musicians, some are a blend, all that. Play to their strengths, discipline them differently, hug them differently, pray with them differently. Every kid is a one-off.
You and Lynn have been married almost 45 years now. Someone wrote in and wanted to know, can you tell us your favorite decade of marriage so far?
So far, you say. Okay. Well, it wasn't the first 10 years. I made a mistake early on, just before we were going to get married. In fact, back up a little bit. When I started dating Lynn, usually when I dated a young lady, I'd pull in the driveway, honk the horn, say, come on, let's go, and they'd run out and get in the car and this kind of stuff. It was cool.
Don't try that. Don't try that.
I was always in a hurry. I was like, come on. So anyway, but when I started dating Lynn, it was always, got to come to the door. Well, then the parents would invite me in, and not just invite me in. They wanted me to sit down on the couch and talk. And I'm like hair on fire, wanting to get out to the boat or doing whatever fun thing we were going to do. And they wanted to talk about my thoughts and feelings and all this. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So anyway, then, we got engaged eventually, and I thought maybe they'd stop, making me talk all the time. And so finally, after we were engaged, one night, I was kind of in a hurry and wanted to get out of the house, and they really wanted to talk about some stuff. And finally, I said, hey, Bob, I don't see, that's her dad, I don't see that marrying your daughter is going to be a package deal for me. I mainly want to marry your daughter more than your family, so if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of take that approach, okay? That's why the first decade didn't go too well for me. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It took me 10 years to dig out of that hole. And now I say to my kids all the time, you marry a family. It's a package deal. Package deal.
You didn't actually answer the question, though.
Yeah, I would actually say that the current decade we're in is our best. We've learned a lot about each other. We know each other's causes, and we're wildly supportive of each other's causes, and we have so much fun with our kids and grandkids. This is a great stage of life for us as grandparents, and so, yeah, I would say now.
Knowing Shauna and Todd pretty well, one of the things that I've been able to see is they're both very brave. And I feel like you have done a great job, you and Lynn, at kind of feeding that adventurous spirit and that risk-taking. For many of us who are parents or someday hope to be parents, how did you decide, I'm gonna let my kids sail around the world, or I'm gonna let them at 8 years old drive a boat, or let them get on a plane and fly across the Atlantic? How did you do that?
So when I look back, one of the greatest gifts that my father gave to me, and it was my father far more than my mother, but my father gave me the gift of self-confidence. And he put me in enough situations, and he said, you're smart, Billy, and you're talented. You can figure this out. And when he forced me to figure stuff out, he'd take me to one of his farms, and he would say, that field over there needs to be cultivated that's a new tractor, and you got to find the cultivator and hook it all up. And I was like, Dad, I've never driven that make of tractor. I don't know where the cultivator is. And he's like, Billy, figure it out. And then, famous line, and don't call me, just figure it out. Well, I think when you expect kids, when you urge kids to figure stuff out, and you don't hover, and the first time that they get a little discouraged, you don't say, oh, that's okay. You go, no, keep trying, figure it out. Self-confidence builds from within, and it's not a phony, fake self-esteem thing. You develop grit, you develop determination, the confidence to say, I can face the unknown, and with God's help and with a little effort, I can figure out a way. I get really concerned with parents who do too much for their kids. Parents who don't have the kids doing regular chores. Kids run around thinking the world revolves around them. When they get into the work world, they're going to have the surprise of their life. The world does not revolve around them. And I think the sooner that you can teach responsibility, chores, consequences, these kinds of things, you give a huge gift to those kids.
Speaking of your dad, many of us know what a special relationship that the two of you had. And someone wrote in and asked, if you had the opportunity to ask your dad one more question, what would it be and why?
Why don't you take better care of your health? I mean, he never exercised. He had 2 prior heart attacks where the doctors pleaded with him to exercise and to eat better and all that. He blew that off, and the 3rd heart attack, less than a year later, killed him. And he was a smart guy. And he never took his own physical conditioning seriously. And so sometimes we're out on a boat, and I'll be on the boat, then my son Todd, and then Aaron, and my son-in-law, and then Henry and Mac. And I think, most guys my age still have their dads. My dad could be on this boat and see all those generations together. He never took his health seriously. And so we lost him prematurely. He never got to know my kids or, obviously grandkids. And so you go, what a tragic waste. So I say that for any of you. I don't know how God's talking to you while I'm talking about this subject matter right now, but some of